So I guess everyone sees the presentation.
Daniel, can you get a little bit more volume on your mic?
Okay. I hope that's better.
No, that's not. Now it's noisy.
Okay. Is that better now?
No, you're still noisy.
Now, it should be better.
Much better.
Yeah, that should be even better. Okay, so everyone sees the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So now we have 1 minute over the hour, so I think we can start. I have the impression the session is going to be quite long, so welcome to the ACE Working Group session at the IETF 108. This is the not well. I guess you should be familiar with that by now. If you're not, please the time to read it. Here is the agenda. So we have pretty much work to go through. So I suppose we're gonna start. Anyone has any comment regarding the agenda?
Daniel, that doesn't match the agenda in MEDA in the CodeMD.
So, okay. So agenda bashing, anyone has anything to say about the agenda? I see Francesca.
I just wanted to give a 1 minute status update on the Oscore profile during the document status update by the chairs.
Okay.
If you're not going to cover that, I can cover that.
So do you want to cover it right now?
When you get to that point.
Okay. So now status update. Jim, do you want to?
I don't remember them. Just a second.
I can start with the Oscore profile if you want.
Okay,
yeah.
Why don't you?
Yeah. So the Oscore profile has ended last call, IETF last call, and we got 2 reviews from Jen, Art, and Obsteer. And I just recently, i.e. this morning, went through them and added issues to the GitHub. And all the review comments are quite minor editorial clarifications. And we also got some IANA comments, which showed me that there is some fixes to do in the IANA section, and also that we author have to send mails to various review mailing list for adding parameters, such as the CWT, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so to participants, I wanted to say, check the issue tracker for the Oscore profile, and almost all of them are editorial, but there might be something that you want to pitch in. Nothing to discuss today. Thank you.
Okay, the DTLS authorization profile is roughly in the same situation. It's gotten some comments and it needs some author updates and a new version produced. And then I believe Ben will be able to move all 4 of those drafts into IESG process.
Right, that's the plan.
So I guess that was the the status update from area director. So, Ben, do you have anything more to say?
Think I have anything else particular to say. Just that I'm looking forward to sending these documents forward, and I hope that we can make it onto the agenda for the August 30th IETF chat.
Okay, so for August, so, well, author, address the comments then. And now let's move.
Do we have a DTLS? Do we have a DTLS profile author online?
Yes. I'm here. I honestly haven't looked at the issue. I think Olaf was on top of that, but I haven't talked to Olaf in a while either. So I'll ping him after the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Göran. When you go to the mic, please mention your name. It's gonna be easier for the minute taker, which is Jim. And if anyone wants to, to help me, please help him. And now let's move to the work. So MQTT.
Hello, could you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Okay, great. So I'm going to give an update on the MQTT TLS profile. Next slide, that is at version 6 now. Update since the last interim. So the major update, as discussed in the interim, was replacing the scope format with the AIF model. This version 6 also includes responses to Jim's review comments, the latest review comments that was published on the list. The latest review basically made sure that we have all the right definitions in place, especially the definition for a session, now that we support session continuation. And we also added some clarifications in terms of the expected behavior for clients and servers, and did a few corrections. Not anything too major in the rest of the changes. Next slide. I just wanted to remind how the scope format has changed. It now adopts the AIF model, and I used the model suggested by Jim on the list. The only change I introduced is to shorten the permission strings to pub and sub, thinking that their meanings are clear. In the spec, I also changed the example so that it captures the various different topic filters that MQTT accepts, especially in terms of wildcards. Next slide. There are still two open issues. The first one is regarding the session continuation. If you remember, in one of the interim meetings, we discussed that for quality of service purposes, the broker may support session continuation. This allows the clients to connect with a clean start flag set to 1, to 0, and supplying a session expiry interval, which might be indefinite. If the brokers support session continuation, they have to keep state for the client. In MQTT, this state includes the client identifier, how long the session state should be kept for, and additional publish, subscribe messages and acknowledgement messages for communication that requires a higher quality of service. When we're connecting to the broker, the client still must provide a token, and this token still must be validated using the proof of possession that we describe in the spec. The question is whether the client includes the token, the current token, and its introspection results into the client state. that it keeps across sessions. At the moment, I've written this down as a may, thinking that this is a shortcut for the client, for the broker. If it realizes the client is using the same token as before, it can skip, for instance, introspecting the token. However, with May, the broker cannot really validate if the reconnecting client is the same client as before. This is an issue in the original MQTT as well. So two clients may use the same client ID, and they might both want session continuation, and there will be a clash. This is not necessarily a huge security problem because the clients are still permissioned by the token what they receive or send. So they cannot do beyond what their token allows them to do. But it will affect quality of service because some of a client A and a client B, if they have clashes, some of client A's messages can come to client B if the client B takes over client A's client ID. If we change this from may to must, in its current state, the spec cannot support this because it would assume that the clients that are continuing the session always use the same token through these continuations. But for some reason, the client might have gotten a new token. So we need to make a change if we turn this to a must. So my question to the work group, should this be changed to a must? And if it's a must, the suggestion I have is that since we support this for both MQTT version 3.1 and v5, an oath flow-based solution is not appropriate. So we would need to change the connect message to support two tokens. And we would need to rewrite the language so the broker for continuing clients expect to see, and which have a some session state already at the broker, would expect to see two tokens in the connect message. And then we have to think about some error messages when this doesn't happen. So if a client doesn't provide two tokens and it has some session state at the broker, this has to be rejected with appropriate message. This can be a protocol error, for instance, following the MQTT error messages. And for clients clashing with client IDs, if a client has already a token, if this server has client state matching the client ID, but the tokens do not match, it can send a client identifier not valid error, for instance. So we need to think about error messages when these do not hold. So this is one discussion point I want to bring to the working group. Next slide. The other open issue is regarding reauthentication. This is not necessarily an open issue. I just wanted to confirm with the working group that the language I put there is appropriate. As again, in interim meetings, we discussed how the reauthentication happens during a connection. And we accepted this to be allowed for clients that use the challenge response flow. They can push another token during their session. And the broker accepts these requests if a token has already been accepted and validated via challenge response. One issue with this flow, Jim raised that clients may send connect messages without any token, and they can try to go into reauthentication by sending an oath message immediately after. So we kind of changed the language so that we don't allow this to happen. So we don't allow broker to process any data by the client after the connect packet, but before the connect packet. So it has to decide the fate of the connect first before accepting any packets. It's the slight deviation from MQTT version 5, which allows clients to send oath packets after a connect message and before a connect. But we kind of, in this spec, put an order on the oath messages. So the oath packets can only come first from the server. Next.
I think there is a comment in the chat, and I think that was related to the previous issue. It's a question from Ben, which says, I'm going to read it. Unless, Ben, do you want to talk directly?
I can try and talk directly.
Okay.
Partly, I'm not very familiar with how the details of MQTT work, but I was sort of wondering if the session continuation could be treated sort of as an optimization, but you still have the option to fall back to a non-continuation flow. And if that was the case, then the requirement to use the same token would not necessarily be as difficult, because if your token changed, you could just do a fresh session.
I think that's perfectly possible as well, and it would not require any change to the spec. It would basically ask so if the client connects with a new token and it doesn't. So what happens? Let's think about what happens in that state if basically allow the server to associate a state, and it doesn't match the current token that the client provides, the server would reject that, basically. I think we still would need to do some changes to the spec, because if we do this, we assume the client to act properly, like they would stop a session continuation if they got a new token, and they would start a clean session. But I don't think clients are expected to behave properly. They might try to come with a session continuation, and then they would have to provide a token, and then we will fall into a case where the broker needs to respond to that request. So it's either keeps session state, a token as session state, and then makes a check, or it doesn't. If it doesn't, keeps it as a session state, and if the token is valid, it would continue. And we are back to the case where client ID clashes can happen. So I think what Ben suggests would work if clients behave properly, but if we cannot guarantee proper behavior from clients, then.
But I would say it's if clients do not behave properly, that's their problem, I would guess. No.
Yeah, it is going back to the case where client, we don't validate that the client, the reconnecting client is the same client, which is the current case of the spec. So if that's acceptable, we don't need to make any changes to the spec, and we live with whatever negative effect on the client it has. And as I said, I don't think it's a security issue. It's a more a quality of service issue for the clients that have clashing client IDs.
So has anyone any comments regarding what has been said, and any concern that it's up to the client to behave properly unless he is going to be affected?
Actually, in this case, the clients, if we don't make any changes to the to the spec at the moment, client can push a new token, because all the server cares is whether the token provided in the connect is valid or not. So if it's valid, it would be basically using the new token and whatever session state associated with it. We just don't guarantee that it is actually the client session state. However, since the session state is filtered by what the token permits or not, it might not get, it may basically get some acknowledgement messages or publish messages from another client session.
But, well, I don't have all the bits in mind, but the latest statement seems to be a problem. No?
Well, so again, the case is only a quality of service problem in my head, because it is not a private message that the broker is sending to the client. This is a message that is associated with a topic. And if the new client is allowed to see messages from that topic, he can definitely receive those messages. However, if client A comes later, and then some of these messages is not going to be delivered to client A anymore, because according to the server, it has already delivered it. I hope it's more clear. Yeah.
Jim, do you have any?
There's also a small other thing, which is client B can force a disconnect on client A by using the same session ID.
Jim, I did check this. I checked the language in the MQTT to see what happens when client B comes. So client A connected, continuing, and client B comes with the same client ID. MQTT says the server basically accepts the new client. But then I recently checked the language again, and it says it has to validate the new client. And one of the validation options might be that it has to comply with some of the further restrictions and authentication and authorization checks. So we can say that since the client ID came, so one of them is accepted and with a valid token, we might say it doesn't accept the new client. But you're right, it still doesn't know who's right, who's wrong. So there might be cases where people are thrown out of their sessions, definitely. I don't think you're right. I don't think the additional authentication check helps with that case. The new client will take over the old client's session. Again, quality of service issue. I think the client ID clashes are a quality of service issue at the moment, because whatever we send to the clients are subject to the permissions to the token of the tokens that the clients are associated with.
And it's not a new quality of service issue that we're introducing.
Yeah, they can happen in vanilla MQTT. They can happen in the MQTT, basically. We're not adding additional problems to MQTT. It's just that if we basically allow the client, the server, to keep token as the client state, we might get rid of these errors, because we won't allow client ID clashes. We will accept only the client that has the former token be allowed as the session to continue the session. Any coming client will not have a matching token anyway, so they wouldn't be accepted. If the client cannot prove that it has the former token, it won't be accepted, etc. So we might resolve actually issues with the client ID clashes if we add this additional state.
Yeah, so
I don't think it's worth adding the multiple token at this point in order to solve this problem.
Okay, that's acceptable for me as well. I just wanted to make sure that we basically have an agreement on this, because I kind of went for the best effort language with May before, and being fully aware that we are not really validating clients across sessions. And I'm happy with this solution. If we want to do something stricter, yeah, I already made a proposal, but it does increase the complexity.
But I also have the impression that we should really prevent that one session is being taken over by another client, even though they have the right to subscribe.
This happens already in MQTT. MQTT
Okay.
already, again, this is not something that we are introducing as a byproduct of our authentication mechanisms. It can happen in MQTT already. I think it has to be resolved in another layer, like in a operations layer or etc. For if a client is experiencing way too much, it has to be resolved outside the protocol. I think that's how MQTT resolves it.
But so, just a clarification. So if you're taking my session, then
you're disconnected.
So you are basically disconnecting me, and I have to reconnect.
the server disconnects the existing client and accepts the new client. If its token is valid, of course, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So which means that clients need to have a reconnection, a way to reconnect. I mean, it's not once they've done the session, they must have,
so they can connect,
if disconnect, reconnect.
Yeah, if they disconnect, they can send another connect message and come back, yeah. But then they might if they keep using the same client ID, this might be even problematic, because then they will take over the session of that client and that will come back and it will go on forever. So that's why I suggested that it probably is resolved not outside the protocol in MQTT, some other, if clients continuously disconnect because client IDs are clashing. I'm sure there is something that's done outside the protocol in MQTT deployments. But
why would, if someone is already taking that session, why would the server disconnect the other one?
Because it keeps a single client ID per session. It cannot have the same clients with two. It cannot have two clients with the same client ID connected.
Okay, so it's not rejecting the incoming one, but it's rejecting the other ones.
Yeah.
Daniel, the reason is because the client itself could have done something like crash, and it wants to reconnect, and when it reconnects, it wants to take over the session.
But
even though the server might think the session is still active, because it didn't realize the client went away.
Okay, but okay, so it doesn't know whether the client it's a reconnect or if it's still online.
It may not have realized that the client has hung or something happened to the existing session of the client. So when it comes back, it just takes over.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's sounding you're only going to get into trouble with like people forcibly taking over each other's sessions or whatnot if there's already a misconfiguration of some sense. Like if you issued sort of a duplicate token in some sense, and you've got two entities that have a token valid for the same client ID, they're trying to beat each other. That's more of a operational or management issue that has set you up for this rather than a failure of the security mechanism.
Yeah.
Ben, the client ID is not part of the token.
No.
But you still would have to have some client that has a valid token and is trying to claim that client ID.
Yes.
Yes.
So it lets a compromised entity with a valid token try to take over things from other people, or there's an operational problem.
Well, for some reason, the authorization server gave it a valid token, or it came to a valid token for some reason that the RS is able to validate. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this may be the best that we can do. I think we would like it to be the case where we have a little bit more separation between entities that have a valid token, but it sort of seems like this is a property of MQTT that we can't fix.
Yes.
All right.
So I will leave it as may. Is that the decision? The may was basically for me, if, for instance, for reference tokens, the server has already introspected the token already, and then the client connects with the same token again, and he says, okay, I have actually a valid introspection result in my state. I will not do an additional check with the AES, and I use the introspection result because I know what this token will come back with. Of course, this is within the timeouts of how the tokens should be introspected and etc. We've already introduced measures around that. But this was just a kind of allowing the server to do a shortcut. That's why I said may.
I'm just wondering whether we should add some text describing the problem that one client might be disconnected,
Yeah, I think we can. I think we can also use the MQTT, point to the MQTT sections why this is happening as well. So I can add that language as well, add that to the spec explaining that this might happen, but this is a property of the MQTT rather than the ACE profile.
Okay, and what is the length? Because we need a client ID collision, so if they're randomly generated, what is the length of the client ID?
I don't know from the top of my head. The random generation is suggested, but it might be still problematic for the client identifier, because if you keep session state and you keep connecting with random identifiers, you might bloat the server with with information that is never going to be accessed again. So it is 23 UTF-8 encoded bytes in length, the client ID.
Okay. So the collision is also a little bit unlikely.
The maximum 23, it can be anywhere between 1 and 23. So it is.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Maximum. Yeah. Okay. So I'm wondering if anyone has something to say, or if we're all converging to May. And if not, yeah, it seems. I mean, we might document a little bit that problem and just mention it's not related. It's related to MQTT, not ACE.
Okay.
And move forward. That's my my reading. Francesca was in the queue. I don't know if she has something to say.
It doesn't matter. We can take it offline.
Okay. Because the funny thing is that in the interface, I see when the mics are cut, and I see the people talking also. So
I think I talked over this slide. We can move on. Next slide. This was just saying what I have. So the questions I have about the spec, the two questions about basically registering additional registrations that we might need to do. This spec basically allows the AES to include a thumbprint of the RSSX509 certificate for the client to do a server authentication during the TLS handshake. And this is in RSCNF. And the thumbprints for the JOT is registered. And for this spec, we were basically using JSON web tokens, and optionally, we were allowing the CBOR web tokens. And the question is, should this spec register thumbprints for this confirmation claim as well? Or will there be any other spec that does it? What's the expectation from the working group about this question? The second is the registration that needs to be done in the ACE profile registry for the MQTT TLS profile. It kind of asks for a CBOR value, and I'm not too sure what goes in there. So those are the two questions I have regarding registrations. And then I can finish with my next slide. Yeah.
Okay, I was waiting for you to give me floor, but yeah, for the CBOR value or CBOR abbreviation, you can ask for the one. Wait, what is it between -255 and 255? And then Ayana will assign one. You don't need to ask for a specific value.
Okay.
And with the new format of the token, do we have to register something, or?
I'm not too worried if this document does not register the CWT confirmation claims.
Okay.
I think we're going to end up wanting them someplace else reasonably soon, so those show up at some point.
All right. Then I can go to the next slide. So in the next steps, as since I have confirmation regarding the open issues, we can resolve that in the text. And there's so based on the latest Jim's review as well, I do not think there are many technical issues or any technical issues left in the spec to discuss. There's more work to be done in the implementation. There were two implementations I was involved with. One is with the Edinburgh University that basically took the Hive MQ, which is an enterprise MQTT provider, and their community edition stuff, and kind of implemented all the flows for the MQTT version 5 as well, but it doesn't reflect the latest changes to the spec at the moment, especially with the AIF change as well. The second one was just a proof of concept prototype, which kind of remained at version 3.1, and more work needs to be done to bring it to version 5 support. So these are the two implementations I'll be focusing next. But for the next steps for this spec, I basically am looking at the workgroup chairs to give me guidance on what should be done. And that's it. End of my presentation.
Okay, thank you. So guidance on regarding the implementation, is that?
No, the guidance of what is the next steps for the spec in the working group.
Oh, okay, so, well, I mean, maybe Jim has another view, but my guess is now that we with the next iteration, we will be ready for working group last call. But that's my my feeling, and so we will need to have a final reviews from the working group, and then we will send the document to Ben. So when do you think you're going to be able to make the update?
I think pretty soon, because the issues that we discussed, we basically leave the language as it is, and then I'll just have to add the explanation regarding the explanation of what happens in a client ID clash. That's what's kind of remaining thing to do, and that should be easy. Within 1 or 2 weeks, I should have another version.
Okay, so I expect the working group last call to follow soon, the next update. But maybe Jim has another view on that.
Stop, but it's in that ballpark.
Okay. So working group, please be ready to review that document. Mike.
Yes. I missed the point about the CWT confirmation claims. Are there additional ones that you need beyond those already registered by RFC 8747? Oh, a thumbprints confirmation claim. Jim, where else do you think that's going to show up from?
There may be some DTLS systems that are going to want to use certificates too. So I think that may show up as part of that.
Okay, but this being CBOR, we have to get a registered number for this to work, don't we?
But MQTT is currently set up to say we're using JWTs, not CWTs, primarily.
Okay.
And those claims do exist for JWTs.
Yeah, they exist for JWTs. Okay, I'll trust you on this. I just didn't know where we were. Thank you.
Okay. So, well, do you have any more questions, Signum?
No, that's It's from my side.
Okay, so I think we have a plan, and the idea is that we move that document probably in September to the ISG.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next presentation. Group com.
Yeah, I think it's me. Okay, I'll try to be quick on what is not discussion. So this is an update of the key provisioning for group communication using ACE. Next slide, please. This slide is a quick recap. Next slide. Just for an update on what happened since last interim, which was 22nd of June. So we submitted a version 8, which was based on a review from Jim. It was mostly editorial changes and clarification. Oh, maybe I can also share my video so you can also see me while I talk. So the details of these changes, there were 90 something comments, can be found at the pull request linked here. And then there was 24 issues that were created as a result of Jim's follow-up review. So we are starting to plan a version 9. And of those, most of them are, again, clarifications, but 4 we'd like to discuss today. Next slide, please. So the first point, and one of the major ones from today, is that we have discussed with Jim to remove the default URIs from the ACE key group com and have the because right now there is a default URI, and then the application profiles can define their own URI if they need to. And for example, ACE key group com Oscore does that and defines a different URI. So you could have, for example, Oscore group as a URI. So this is all at the KDC, just to remind you. Oscore group as a URI for the Oscore application profile. And then you could have the PubSub application profile that could use something like PubSub as the root URI. So we had the proposal to remove that and have all the application profiles use the same one that would be defined in this document, ACE key group com. And to do so, then the KDC would have to say for each group itself the information about what application profile it's using. For example, group 1 uses encodings from this application profile, group 2 uses this other. And it's necessary that the KDC knows this information, obviously, for encoding and additional requirements. So there is actually 3 options and not 2. So the first one is to register the ACE group as a well-known URI in this document. The second one is to register a resource type, only one, for this root URI, and describe the resource directory used to find this URI. And it's the same way that we have discussed for the auth info in the framework. And as a consequence, if we pick this option, then we need to decide a couple more things. The first one would be, do we need to define new target attributes for each application profile to do filtering? So as an example, let's say that you want to access all groups that have that are under a certain profile. Let's say you want to access all Oscore groups and you don't care about the PubSub groups. You could request these URIs and you could have a target attribute saying only want these. So do we need to do something like that? And also, as a note, we already have registered an interface. So I'm not really knowledgeable about interfaces and resource types, but we already have registered the interface. We have IANA registration. So can we use that instead of registering another resource type? And how is that different? And then there is the third option, which is to register a different resource type for each application profile. So instead of registering only one in ACE key group com, then you could have one resource type for the Oscore group resource defined in the first bullet above, another one for the pub sub resource, etc. And that indeed was a cue for Karsten to give us his opinion. But anybody who has an idea here will be very much appreciated.
Okay, since my name was said, yeah, I think that's really a judgment call, and it depends a lot on what other nodes are actually going to search for when doing discovery. So if they are interested in something that does group communication and then need very specific target attributes to specify that further, that would argue for doing it in the base document, for defining the RT in the base document. But I think it's really more likely that somebody who's trying to discover something already knows that this is going to be an Oscore group or a PubSub service. So I also think that, see Jim's comment here, I also think that registering different resource types may work better. And yeah, resource types are cheap. So I think we can give out several of them. If you really want to be able to find out something is just generally a group com thing, you can still define an interface type, which you can then add to the resource type and say, oh, by the way, this is one example of the generic group com thing.
Okay, so you basically answered my next question, which was, we already defined the interface type, and I was wondering how that would be useful once you have the resource type defined, and you just answered that. So thank you. Marco?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, I also support number 3, and we are actually already doing that, just registering a resource type in another document. Now, a core document with a suggestion from Jean to move the registration in keygroup.com Oscore instead. But yeah, that helps a lot for filtering during the discovery phase.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and Jim, I see that you like number 3, but I don't understand. It can be placed on both the root and each child of the root.
Not only put it on the slash group or slash group com thing, you can also put it on slash group com slash group 1. So that group 1 actually, you can advertise that group 1 actually is Oscore, while slash group 2 could be something else. And the slash group root could say, I support both of them.
Okay. I'm just so you're talking about registering the resource type. Do we need to? I mean, I see what you're saying. I'm not sure I see the changes in the document required for that, or if there is any change required for that. So what we are proposing in number 3 is that we register a resource type for the root of each application profile. So for example, for the Oscore group, the root of the, we register Oscore group for the root. Is there anything more that we need to do at that point?
I'm
Just have
sorry,
a question.
I had to go off because I had to plug power into my headset. What was the question?
Okay, so I'm just wondering if we need to. I see what you're saying, and I'm not sure that requires any addition to the document except for registering a resource type for each application profile.
That would be correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because then what you're saying that is that you could use this resource type when doing resource discovery also for not only the root but the other child of the root.
Just for me to, as a clarification, what are the different application profile we have? It's 2 or 3, no?
So right now there is the ACE Oscore is the most advanced one, and there is also the PubSub, which is less advanced.
Okay,
and that includes both COAP PubSub and MQTT PubSub.
Okay, so that's MQTT is in PubSub.
Well, this application profile, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so if we all agree, there is no discussion.
Yep, we can move to the next one. Yes, so this is more of a note that we will do this change. So as a comment, as a result of comment from Jim, we will clarify the difference between group name and group identifier. And so the difference is that the group name is the invariant once established identifier of the group, which is used in the scope to identify the group between AS client and KDC. And it can be encoded as anything, and we propose to change this to text string for simplicity. While the all capital group name is the value that is used in the URI, and it maps in some sense to the group name, but it's not the same value, and we're going to keep it that way. And then finally, there is a group identifier, which is the identifier of the group key material and not of the group itself. And the difference is that this identifier changes with rekeys. And we will add this group identifier. Right now, we were not talking about this group identifier, but we will add it as a result of review comments. So next slide. So it's important to understand this difference because this is another update that we propose to do, is to add a put and handler at the root of the interface of the KDC.
Just Francesca.
Yeah.
Regarding the previous issue, I can see Ben in a Jabber room expressing some concern.
Okay.
That some directorates and ISG reviewer might ask for a larger difference between the names. So.
The reason for calling group identifier would be that that's what the Oscore document calls it, and that's because the Oscore group communication document calls it that way. So we are inheriting it from those documents. Yeah, we can, let's discuss this offline. I think or Ben, do you want to say something?
Yeah,
I agree that we should discuss it out. We can
Okay.
put another adjective on the other two, and that will help.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Okay, so for this proposal update is that we are adding this put handler where the client would send a list of group identifier and get back the corresponding group names and the URIs at the KDC for those identifier. And this is useful when there is a rekey, the node gets group identifier, so the identifier of the group key material, which it does not recognize, and wants to know what group to contact, like what group to ask for key material at the KDC. For example, it needs to know the URI is group/group1 or G1, where G1 is where this is the URI for group 1. And so a way to do this is the client would do a put at the root of the interface at the KDC including the group identifier. Let's say in this case, it's asking for 2 group identifiers. And the response will be at 205, including group identifier. So it's a map, including group identifier, an array of group identifiers, G name, which is group names, in this case, group 1, group 2, and then G URI, so an array of URIs. And this is missing closing parentheses, but just imagine that it's there. And both these request and response would have content format ACE group com plus CBOR, and this means that we would need to register GNAME and GURI as ACE group com plus CBOR parameters. So as you can see, basically, the first element of each array is mapping. GID, the first element of GID is mapping with the first element of GNAME and first element of GURI. And we propose this encoding. Do you think that's, what do you think? Is this good, or anybody has better proposal? We'll take it.
So parallel arrays are a bit Fortran-y to me, but yes, you can do it this way.
Are a bit, I didn't hear the...
Fortran.
Okay, yeah.
Fortran didn't have records, so if you wanted to have an array of records, you instead allocated parallel arrays.
Yes, yeah. Well, we do it this way to save on bytes. Obviously, we could have arrays, 1 array per each group, but that if you have a lot of groups, then there's going to be a lot of arrays. And also we could talk about put versus post, and we'd welcome feedback on that as well. And Jim is saying this should be fetch, which is also a good point. Karsten, do you want to say something?
Okay, so I would have to look it up because I'm not good at remembering details, but a put normally doesn't give you a 205. And really, this is not changing the resource, right? It's really an inquiry of the resource.
Yes, I agree. It should be a fetch.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll do this change. I mean, it's not in the document right now, so this is the whole point, to getting feedback before we put it in. So I'm happy with this, and if there's no other comments on the encoding, I think we can move to the next one.
Just clarification, why should it be a fetch?
It's the better method for this, for what this handler is actually doing.
Fetch is, please give me information, and here's some filters on the information I want to get.
Okay, and the presence of the filter determined a fetch as opposed. Oh no, but why not a get?
Get doesn't have payload. The get request.
Okay, right. Okay.
Okay, so I think we can move to the next slide then.
Yeah.
We have a way forward. Yes, and this is a very recent point of discussion. So from the Jim's review, it's not clear how this specific resource is used. So this would be ACE group, group 1, nodes, node 1. And we define in the document that nodes can use this resource to renew individual key material. So you would send a put request to this resource to get back input to derive key material to protect outgoing messages to the group. And this is different than group key material. This is something that allows you to derive a for example, a specific key that is individual to you, to the node requesting it. So making the parallel with Oscore, this would be, for example, getting the sender ID in the Oscore groups. So we cannot talk about, so this is, it is hard to give the hint of what this individual key material is without talking about Oscore. Some application profiles may not even implement individual key material. So the proposal that came from one of Jim's comments was to make it so that profiles may additionally use this handler to rekey the whole group. So basically what we want to say is that this is used to renew your individual key material and optionally, additionally rekey the whole group. So it is up to the application profiles to specify if they support renew of individual key material and or rekey of the whole group via this handler. And we do not want to put a must here because that would make it so that any member could request a rekey of the whole group by just sending a request to this endpoint, and we don't want to do that. Does this sound like a good idea? Jim, this is mostly from your input, so.
I'll need to see it written down, but it sounds like a reasonable way to go.
Okay, great. And also reading the chat, and Ben seems to agree. And yes, we definitely need to add some considerations about that. And I think, yes, next slide. That's my last slide. The plan is to submit version 09 and then possibly working group last call.
Yeah, that would be good.
So yeah, I guess we'll move forward. We do these updates that we discussed today and the rest of the follow-up comments from Jim, and then we can move forward. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Francesca. Next presentation, I'm looking at the time. Yeah, Marco?
Yes. Right, thank you. This is an update on this working group document. It's an application profile base from KeyGroup.com. Next slide, please. Usual recap, this is about an ACE client that wants to access an Oscore group through the group manager. So it gets an access token first, posts it at the group manager, then sends a joining request, and it gets in the joining response the key material to communicate with group Oscore in the group. Next slide, please. Right. In this update, we have mostly closed a number of open points already discussed at the latest interim in June. The biggest one was actually when the exact role combination should be checked to possibly stop a node from continuing. And as we agreed, that happens only when processing the actual joining request. So if that contains a scope expressing a combination that doesn't make sense, then the joining is interrupted. And as suggested by Jim, we have moved to this document as more appropriate, the definition of the default values for a number of parameters describing essentially how the group works cryptographically. And then we have some big change concerning the format of scope, inspired by the latest development of AIF. So we are essentially defining an AIF-specific data model, AIF Oscore Group Com, to express scopes for this application profile. And at a high level, we still have scope as an array of scope entries, each of which has to express the group name and the roles intended to get in the group. But now we are trying to follow an AIF paradigm instead. Next slide, please. To give a bit more details about that, in fact, according to the new data model, we have as first element path in the scope entry, still the group name as text string, as it used to be before. But now the role or combination of role is expressed as a single integer, which is actually a bitmap indicating the exact roles that that node is supposed to get in the group. And that, of course, meant a lot of new IANA registrations, mostly to cover the actual AIF part, but also for the sake of future extensibility, to create a new registry about the identifiers for the roles in the group.
Just a question. The permission, can you have multiple roles or?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
With that single integer, you can express multiple roles combined,
Okay.
setting bits essentially as flags.
Okay. Next slide.
Yes. Okay, yes. We had some mismatch in the formats of two information representation, one in a parameter, one in a payload. So we already had a method, actually based on fetch, to request public keys of other group members for a node that is already also a group member. And the format of that payload was different from the format of an analogous parameter, get pub keys, instead used in the joining request to get at joining time the public keys of the current group members. And that used to work in an all or nothing way. So if the parameter is present, it had to be an empty array to just get all public keys of current group members. And we made a change to align the format of that parameter to the fetch payload of that other method, and request not necessarily all the public keys of the current members in the group, but only the public keys of members that have particular roles or combination of roles. So we indicate that as a filter rule in the first inner array, following, again, the same encoding based on AIF that we considered for scope, actually. While for this particular case, for this parameter in the joining request, the second array is always empty because the joining node has no idea of the not names at that point in time. We chose to keep anyway a second array always empty just to keep the very same format of the fetch payload instead. And as a final thing, we have also defined here the default values for group policies that now the group manager has to return in the joining response. So in case when creating the group, those values for those policies were not specified, the group manager has to consider those as default values. Next slide, please. This actually concludes my updates. We have one open point, which is mostly clarification. We noticed also talking to other people in the joining response to indicate the sender ID assigned to the new member, we are using the client ID parameter from the Oscore security context object because it was convenient, no need to register a new one. And all in all, this is an ACE client. Verify that the name client ID has nothing to do with any possible co-op role that a new member takes in the group. So just avoid confusion. And then Jim suggested also to move the registration of a resource type associated to this kind of joining resource from the document where it is currently registered to this one as more appropriate. And this was pending a decision about using resource types in ISKI-group.com, but it seems we got the decision now. So moving this registration here can be done. We were just wondering if since we would move the registration to this document, a different, better name than the current one would be more appropriate. That's not much. Fine to me. I can start moving it with the same name. Yes, then we plan, of course, to have interop tests, and I can think of our implementation, James and Peter van der Stok also has one. But after that, we believe this can also move on to working group last call.
Okay, great. So we probably need a little bit more reviews, but it's great plans.
Great, thank you.
Anyone has any comment? So basically, there is a call for reviewing those drafts as soon as they're being published. Now, Jim, I'm wondering, should we go to the CMP?
Yeah.
Should we go to the CMP presentation first?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. So Mohit?
Hi everybody, this is Mohit. So can you please go to the next slide? So yeah, so basically just to give some background, so this this draft is an extension of a current working group draft in LAMP's group, and basically the previous draft was to make changes to the existing CMP v2 profile to make it more suitable for IoT devices. And since IoT devices use mostly COAP for their transport because of the power constraints, this was basically one of the intended chapters in the draft. But then it was decided that we will probably remove this thing out of the lightweight CMP profile draft and create it as a new document in ACE group because that's the more suitable place for this. So, so in general, we have support for HTTP transport for CMP v2 protocol, and this COAP is very similar to HTTP, and I'm trying to follow whatever is written in RF66712, which defines HTTP transport for CMP protocol. Next slide. Next slide. So these are some key points what we are in like highlights of the draft. So the first thing is basically the CMP v2 profile is transport agnostic. So basically the way the protocol is written, you can even use email to basically do the transactions to get a certificate from the CA or RA. And then the second thing is to support blockwise transfer mode to avoid fragmentation. And the third main point is so basically because most of the existing systems they support HTTP for CMP v2, it will be a good idea to use a COP to HTTP proxy at the boundary of the constrained device network so that the existing systems they don't need to change much. And lastly, COAPS can be used for instead of COAPs if we need to have additional secrecy where you don't even want the people to see if there is a COAP content going through or there is a CMP v2 transaction happening, and it can use DTLS basically. So these are some key points of the draft. Next slide, please. So So this is what I mentioned initially. Basically, we after discussion in the LAMPS working group, so it was decided that this part should be taken by the ACE working group because it's more suitable to the ACE agenda. But I think there is we need to do recharter to add this to basically adopt this document in ACE working group. So so that is the main point of discussion today. So if we want to support the recharter to add this, so that we can adopt this draft. So anybody has any questions?
So, yeah, Jim?
So this document is here basically because it is doing COAP and it is doing an enrollment protocol, which in some respects is part of ACE. It's and this is basically the same thing as what the EST document did. The group is not expected to have any expertise on CMP itself. It is basically just looking at, is just doing a good job of using COAP. So that's basically what we're looking for in terms of the expertise from the working group. I'm not too sure, Ben, what we want to say in terms of how much support we need to try and adopt this document. It should be a pretty lightweight document for the group to handle.
I think that we can do sort of a standard adoption call sort of thing, and I agree that we don't need a huge number of participants to be able to review it, to have confidence that we're doing the right thing.
Anyone strongly opposing for such a document? So I'm hearing none. So the question I would have is that can we adopt that document without restructuring the working group?
I think we would need to recharter to pick it up. I was just going through the charter in the past few minutes.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So we will probably have first recharter and then do the call for adoption. That's my understanding.
Okay.
Goran?
So
Mohit, please.
so I will wait for recharter and then I will send a call for adoption.
Yeah. I don't think we should be long to recharter. Jim?
Don't know. We have to finish looking at things. Note that that doesn't preclude people from doing reviews on the documents. We can review documents that are not part of our charter.
Okay. Goran? If you are not on the queue, Goran? Okay.
Oh, here I am. Okay, Göran Selander from Ericsson. I'm just curious. I'm sorry, I haven't read the draft. Just trying to understand. I read in the table of contents there is something about multicast co-op and proxy support. Could you just elaborate a little bit, Mohit, on that? How that's supposed to work?
So basically, what I'm suggesting in this draft is to not support multicast, to not use multicast for CMPv2 messages. So the entities won't be listening on multicast addresses. So multicast may be only used when we have to do some service discovery, and that is, I think, standard service discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay, good.
Yeah.
Thanks. And the proxy part, that's something you'd like to support?
Yeah, basically, I see like to have good adoption of this thing. It's better to have proxy because COAP over internet itself is prone to some basically attacks and all those things because of being on UDP. So it provides some additional security to the servers.
So basically, what this draft is about is the transport, how you transport.
Yes.
With co-op or with co-op and HTTP or with security as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So, I mean, do we have any more questions? Mohit, do you have any things clear?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay.
So we can move to the next document. Thank you.
Okay. So, thank you very much for the presentation. Should we move to AIF?
Sure.
Is that AIF?
So I'm not sure whether we really have to repeat yesterday's talk from the core working group. Can we quickly find out how many of the people were in the core working group? Just everyone who was in the core working group request speaker permission, and then we will see who was there. So 4 people were there, 5, 6. Okay, maybe we have to go through this quickly then. So the authorization information format is a proposal that has been around for quite a while. It's next slide, please. It's meant as a format to convey authorization information, and there is a little bit of information security 101 on this slide. So it supplies a capability list that maps objects to the permissions they have. And what the authorization information format does not do is the securing of this capability list. So this has to be done outside or by a secure channel, some form of binding and so on. So this is the really just the access control information. Next slide. And we recently decided that we make this a little bit more generic. The original proposal only supported mapping paths, URI paths, to permissions. And we now have a generic form, which is essentially just an array of pairs. And then you can instantiate this by saying, my object selector is a path and my permission is a set of bits that stand for COAP methods. So that's the basic thing, but as we already have seen, other documents like MQTT and GroupCom define their own version of this. Next.
I just have a question. Do we have a registry for the get postput subpub?
Yes. So if you want to have a variant of AIF for something, then you need to put in both the type for the object identifier, object selector, and the type for the permissions. And in this case, the type for the permissions are derived from the COAP methods. These already have numbers, so it's obvious how to use those numbers. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
So the most recent addition to AIF in draft -09 is based on the observation that while IoT devices usually have mostly static resources, so the model of mapping paths, URI paths to static resources to permission bits works very well. While that is the case, there are some dynamic resources in IoT devices typically called action resources, because they are created when a client performs an action on a device, such as moving an actuator arm and so on. That might take some time. So you may need to influence the action while it is executing. And typical idiom is that you get back a resource to control the ongoing action. And what we came up with was essentially a copy of the bits we already have. So you see this is exactly as on the previous slide, except that it says dynamic dash and all the numbers are plus 32. So these are bits that you can set on a resource, on a base resource, that you would use to start an action. And the dynamic means the resources that are created based on actions, based on requests on this base resource. So the action resources, those are governed by these permissions. And these permissions are typically different. So if you have a base resource that allows you to make coffee, and then you get an action resource that is controlling one particular coffee making process, you might have a delete request on that, so it stops making that coffee. But of course, you wouldn't give the client the permission to delete the coffee maker. So these are different, and therefore they get different bits. And when we discussed this yesterday, we found out that we maybe need another copy for resources that are related to a base resource, but haven't been created by this particular instance. So we will have to find out how to do that. Next slide. So this has been in working group adoption call until yesterday, and I'm very interested in hearing the result of that. So is that draft adopted?
I have to check, but I haven't seen any major opposition to that draft.
The chairs need to get together and make the final decision, but my expectation is yes. We should send that out today or tomorrow.
Great.
Ben? If you're speaking, we don't hear you, but we see you.
I guess I did not approve my microphone permission. So I had a question from the previous slide, which is sort of with the concept of tracking the resources created from a base resource and having the permissions for those. So who has to track which resources are created from a given base resource? Is it just the resource server, or would there be the other people? Okay.
Yes.
So it's a little bit of state keeping, but not too much.
Only the resource server can do that, because the resource server is usually not really asking anyone else about that. If a client has a permission to use the base resource to create an action, then it just goes ahead. This resource server just goes ahead and does that. So it would mark the temporarily created action resource with the identity of the client that created it, and copy over the permissions minus 32, so that the client can access this action resource.
I see. Thanks. And just to give a brief note for everyone, you had on the last slide my question about what else is similar to this, and that was just sort of me looking at our charter text, which reminds us to use things that exist already when possible, and to also bear in mind if there's potential broader scope for things that we do. So just to clarify, that's where I was coming from with that question.
Yeah, when I started this, I looked for other ways of doing this, and I was surprised not to find anything. And the reason really is that the idea of having a server that has a pretty fixed set of static resources, and somebody else tells that server who is allowed to access those resources, that's pretty specific to IoT. So it's kind of new, or at least it was new in 2014. So that may be a reason why I didn't find anything, but we still should look at other things and see whether we can find commonalities.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Well, thank you for the presentation, Carsten.
Thank you.
Then we can move to the next presentation. Do we have any preference between admin or?
I would prefer gem admin personally, but.
Okay. Because I think that's going to be the last one.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Marco here. This is an update on another document defining a different interface on the Oscore Group Manager. Next slide, please. So just to recap, this interface is intended for an administrator ACE client for creating, deleting, and configuring Oscore groups at the group manager before the joining process can start for candidate members. And it has an overall design pattern similar to the one of the co-op app sub-broker, though in a way it becomes a bit simpler. And right now we are supporting both link format and CBOR and Coral. And in principle, the idea is to have the group manager two new types of resources. The first one is a single instance. It's a group collection resource at, say, /manage as an example. And then we're going to have under that resource one group configuration resource for each group existing at that group manager that can be reached through the corresponding group name. Well, we use ACE for access control. The administrator is the client, and the group manager is the resource server here. Next slide, please.
I'm just realizing that group name has an underscore. So given the discussion we had with Francesca.
Oh, thanks for noting. We can make things uniform.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's the intent, of course. Thank you. Yeah, just an overview of the interface. On the single instance group collection, the idea is that a request can be sent to create a new Oscore group, and that practically means creating two resources. One is the actual child resource with the group configuration, and one is the group membership resource corresponding to that group where joining requests can be sent. And other operations are possible, like retrieving the full list or a filtered list of existing group configurations, so of groups, or practically links to talk to those resources. Next slide, please. Yeah, other operations, and we plan to extend this set in future version, are on the group configuration resources, of course. And that's about retrieving the current configuration for a group, or overriding it entirely, or, well, deleting it, so deleting the Oscore group. Next slide, please. Right.
Do you see the comment from Jim in the Java room? Just to let you know.
Now I do. Shall we take it?
Oh, yeah, sure. Jim is in the line.
My comment is with the last topic.
Oh, okay.
Okay, perhaps we can think about it and take it offline.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, this version was mostly about addressing a review from Jim and comments we got from Christian and also Carsten at the latest interim. We moved away, as I mentioned before, some default values to the other draft. We try to simplify the text of a section describing side effects that would happen on the current group members if the administrator decides to update the group configuration on the run. Apparently, it was a bit hard to read. Now it's hopefully better. Please, Jim, check and let us know. Next slide, please. Right, we have also added an actual payload in the response to a group creation, now specifying more information in return to the administrator that can be used especially to advertise the existence of the group or to register it to a resource directory. We have also better clarified the intention and scope of this work in the introduction, also based on feedback from Karsten and Christian on the list. And giving more guidance on how practically the registration of the group can follow, for instance, on a resource directory, either from the group manager itself or from the administrator on behalf of the group manager. Next slide, please. Right, we have a number of open points. One came from a review from Jim that, if we understood correctly, he was suggesting to consider two different names for the Oscore group created, one intended for the administrator for admin operations, and one instead intended to be advertised and made public for candidate members to join. So yeah, I agree, it's fine, there's no big penalty on doing that. I just wanted to hear more on advantages you are seeing in doing that.
Know how much an advantage or disadvantage is. That is just the model that the pub sub people over in core were using.
Okay, but it's an easy thing to do, so we can definitely include something about this already in the next version. Okay, thanks. That we have a kind of new open point that also Peter raised recently. Right now, when creating a group, the administrator suggests the name that the group should take. Of course, if it's taken already, an error is returned, but we are leaving the final decision on the group name to the group manager. And we have been thinking to simplify this and to just have the administrator proposing the name. And if that name is available, that name is taken when creating the group. That will simplify things a bit, and it goes along the line of thinking of the administrator that, well, it knows what it's doing. It has its reasons to try to go for that name. Is it fine? Do you think it is fine to go for this change? Any opinion?
Justin, I'm just one of the reasons that if this is about the path of the group, if it's not, then please stop me right now. The server might have more constraints than the administrator is considering. If it is not about the path, sorry for the interruption.
Okay, thank you. We'll discuss more on this. Next slide, please. Okay, and Christian also suggested that it's worth looking into a kind of use case where other than the administrator as a main one creating the group, there may be other side administrators that can jump in later on and be allowed to do at least something on those groups, like if they created them. And this somehow is also aligned with a side issue we started to discuss during the latest hackathon, especially with Jim. We are starting to think to define a proper scope format that can be used here to express what an administrator can do. And we'll do that keeping also this use case in mind. And finally, we'd also like to consider when creating the group that the administrator can specify also the names of the application groups using that Oscore group. And they would be aligned also with an assumption we are doing in another document where we are assuming that the group manager knows of these application groups and their names when it registers links to the security group in the resource directory. And this is also aligned with suggestions that Jim gave in a Choral and Forms discussion in core, taking this document as a building example. Next slide, please. This is the conclusion. We have a number of steps ahead related to the open points, the format of scope, more operations for the interface, and considering, again, related to the Coral Forms discussion, even more information and hints that we can give to the administrator in response to a group creation. As a final point, yeah, this document was under call for adoption that concluded on 6th of July, if I'm not wrong. So we are eager to hear from the chairs.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we will go back to the last question on the mailing list. I think we should close the meeting now. So thank you everyone for attending. Just to let you know that we have interim meetings in September and October. I'm trying to find the chair slides. These have been registered now. So please, we hope that the working group last call for all the documents that are ready for working group last call are going to be submitted before those meetings. So please update your draft and so that we can start those calls. Thank you for this time. Everyone signed the blue sheet, so that's perfect. Thank you. And well, what can I say? Jim, Ben, do you want to say something?
I just had one unrelated point. I wanted to call to everyone's attention the IETF gather.town setup, which is sort of a virtual environment where you can wander around in a environment kind of like the conference hallway and run into people and chat. And at least for me, it's sort of a nice representation of the typical IETF in-person experience where you can find your old friends and catch up with how they're doing and whatnot. So I encourage people to take a look if they're interested.
So can you repeat it's gathering that?
Yeah, it should be on the agenda page. I think it's gather.town is the domain that runs the site, and we have our own subdomain and particular URL.
And, wow. Agenda.
I think the link is actually in the newcomers quick connections entry from Thursday, and then every place else where gather.town appears, it's not a link. So it should be near the top.
And gather.town, yeah. So that's here.
That's the link right there. Yeah, that should be the one.
So yeah, please everyone go to that site. And yeah, so thank you for attending this session, and maybe see you at the break. Is that in town or gathering or I don't know? It's a bit of mist of everything. Okay, so I think we can adjourn the meeting unless Ben or Jim has anything to add. And I hope to see you during the interim meetings. Thank you. Bye-bye.